This week on Global Wrap with me, Shivani Singh, China tightens its rare earth grip on the United States. Xi, Modi and Putin share the spotlight at the SCO, and Beijing rolls out Victory Day parade. In Indonesia, protests flare up after the death of a delivery driver, and several US allies including Britain, France, Canada, Australia and Belgium have announced plans to formally recognize Palestinian state at the upcoming United Nations General Assembly session, a move firmly opposed by Washington. Let's get into the details. While the US administration has been vocal in its criticism of countries purchasing Russian oil, it seems only a certain countries are targeted. India, for instance, faces a 25% penalty merely for buying oil from Russia, or at least that's the official stance. Interestingly, China, also one of the world's largest buyers of Russian crude, has largely escaped this similar scrutiny. Now, this raises questions about the underlying dynamics of global trade and diplomacy. Hello and welcome, I'm Shivani Singh, and in this segment we'll understand America's selective penalties, why China receives more lenient treatment and the leverage it holds over the US. America's trade advisor made a bizarre statement labeling Russia-Ukraine war as Modi's war. Now, it's ironic considering Europe hasn't fully severed economic ties with Russia, and China, still the largest buyer of Russian oil, faces no such criticism, despite the US claiming that the money from Russian oil purchase funds the war in Ukraine. Here's what he said.
I mean Modi's war, because the road to peace runs, in part, through New Delhi. Everybody in America loses because of what India is doing. Consumers, businesses, workers lose because India's high tariffs cost us jobs and factories and income and higher wages. And then the taxpayers lose because we've got to fund Modi's war.
Now, this is bizarre because while claiming to care about peace, the approach seems selective and convenient. China holds significant leverage over the US, so it is paired, and the narrative differs for them but not for India. This comes right after Trump administration imposed 50% tariffs on Indian goods, affecting over half of India's export to the US. Sure, electronics and pharmaceuticals get a free pass, but textile, jewelry and other labor-intensive sectors, hard-working Indian exporters bear the brunt. India, of course, defends its right to buy Russian crude. Navarro calls it arrogance. Meanwhile, the US pretends that selectively lecturing the world on moral high ground is perfectly reasonable. While the US focuses on India, China quietly dominates the rare earth market. In June, Ford Motor Company, America's second largest automaker, temporarily idled some of its US plants over 3 weeks due to shortage of magnets containing rare earth minerals imported from China. Trade tensions have already prompted Chinese regulators to tighten controls on critical minerals, impacting not just the auto sector but manufacturers worldwide. China controls over 60% of global rare earth production. Recent regulations now require reporting of both domestic and imported rare earth flows. As per reports, the Trump administration rushed officials to negotiate with Chinese counterparts to ensure steady supply of rare earth magnets, highlighting US's vulnerability. Despite these urgencies, Washington continues to lecture India for importing Russian oil, ignoring the fact that China can effectively weaponize trade in critical resources without facing similar consequences. In other words, if China decides to pull a fast one, US industries from EVs to defense could face a serious headache. But the US chooses to focus on lecturing India instead. China is the largest manufacturer in the world and a critical supplier of electronics, rare earth minerals and pharmaceuticals. US companies depend heavily on Chinese factories for components and finished goods. Disrupting this could hurt American industries and consumers. China controls over 60% of global rare earth production, which are essential for semiconductors, military tech, electric vehicles and renewable energy. Any restrictions on export cut could disrupt US defense and tech industries. Navarro's Modi's war remarks is a classic example of selective outrage. While India gets tariffs and moral lectures, China, also a major Russian oil buyer, gets negotiations and quietly controls strategic minerals that US industries simply can't operate without. To understand this better, we're being joined by Dr. Manoranjan Sharma, Chief Economist at Informatics Valuation and Ratings Limited. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now, why do you think the US has chosen to penalize India for buying Russian oil while China, the world's largest buyer, faces no similar scrutiny?
Well, I think to my mind, it's a case of selective application, clear case of double standards. Possibly, India is coming of age with a growing economic, diplomatic, and strategic muscle and heft at the global heft. So perhaps the US President Donald Trump might have thought that they could ride roughshod over India, but they are greatly mistaken. हम लाए हैं तूफान से कश्ती निकाल कर. We have weathered many crises in the past, and I'm confident that we will overcome this challenge also. हम हो गए कामयाब. We will overcome this.
Right, right. Sir, moving on, there's this bizarre comment by US trade advisor Peter Navarro calling the Russia-Ukraine war Modi's war. Now, this truly is a selective narrative. How do you think this is going to affect US-India relations in the near future?
Certainly, US-America relations were built with great care and painstaking efforts on the part of leadership of both the two countries. But then, with these, in the last few months since President Donald Trump came into power in January 2025, relations have steadily gone down the hill. But then, this is not correct. They buy rare earth is bought by Europe, America, from China, Russia itself, they buy plutonium, uranium in huge quantities. So, as I said earlier, this is a case of a clear case of selective application, a case of double standards, and America being the largest democracy in the world, and then in terms of its historical legacy, in terms of the power it influences, they should have been more careful in their choice of words and expressions. First, you have to set your house in order before accusing others of something else.
Right. Now, there were reports in June that Ford Motor Company, America's second largest automaker, temporarily idled some of its US plants over 3 weeks due to shortages of magnets containing rare earth minerals imported from China. Now, how significant is China's control over rare earth minerals, and why does this give Beijing a leverage over US industries?
Well, rare earths is very significant. Something like 80 even 95% of rare earths is sourced from China. This has humongous potential for growth and structural transformation. It has application across a wide spectrum, such as electric vehicles, defense system, wind turbines, consumer electronics, we have smartphones and display, all being dependent on, to a certain extent, being function of the availability of rare earths. So it is easy to preach, but difficult to follow in practice.
Good. Now, the recent temporary shutdowns of the US auto plants also highlights the dependence of US industries on China. Now, could this dependence influence US policies towards Beijing?
Yes, certainly. US has been talking tough on China sometimes back. Shortly after Donald Trump came into power, he had imposed an exorbitant, atrocious level of tariffs, but there has been significant backsliding. There was some kind of a pushback. So maybe they find that China is not such a pushover. There will be a strong pushback. So there has been a recalibration of the strategies. There has been a reorientation of the thought process, given the kind of muscle, the kind of economic power which China enjoys in the world today. And this is set to grow in the years and decades going forward.
Right. Now, how effectively can China weaponize its rare earth exports in trade and geopolitical negotiations? The negotiations on tariff, India has been hit with 50%, 25% of which is penalties for importing Russian oil, but none of that has happened with China. So, how is China weaponizing on its rare earth exports in the negotiations?
As I said, in the present world order, rare earths has emerged as one of the most significant critical inputs. So China enjoys monopoly power in this respect. As I said, 95% of rare earths all over the world. So they are using this dominant power, this kind of a monopoly situation to their advantage. They are using it to threaten, if I may use a more stronger word, perhaps blackmail America to force them into some kind of a submission. And this is the way the world goes. But we are not living in the days of Jesus Christ that you will slap my left cheek and I will put forward the right cheek also. you will also get it in equal measure.
So, moving on to the last question, the kind of language that we're listening from the US officials in regards to India, now that is really selective given the fact that other countries like China are doing the same. So, why is India being targeted?
Well, yes, I agree with you entirely. This is very nasty and undiplomatic language that the US officials, senior officials, are using against India. It's a case of what you call hitting below the belt. But then, at different points of time, America itself has sided with authoritarian dictatorial regimes, China under Deng, Cuba under Battieste, Iraq under Saddam Hussein, Indonesia under General Suharto, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. So it's a case of kettle calling the pot black, and this US has been buying rare earths from China, uranium and plutonium from Russia. So these kind of comments, to our mind, are not only just unjust but also completely uncharitable. They deserve to be dismissed with all the contempt at our command.
Right, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us for this segment. Thank you so much for making time.
Thank you. A pleasure being with you.
At the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin, Prime Minister Narendra Modi appeared alongside Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin. A powerful image of three leaders highlighted that Asia's power balance cannot be dictated from Washington.
很高兴在天津同莫迪总理再一次会面，欢迎你来华出席2025年上海合作组织天津峰会。中国和印度是两大东方文明古国，是世界上人口最多的两个国家，也是全球南方重要成员，肩负着造福两国人民、促进发展中国家团结振兴、推动人类社会进步的重要责任。
The images of PM Modi with Xi were particularly notable after years of tension along their border. The handshake suggested both leaders are willing to turn the page, focusing on stability, trade and development rather than confrontation.
Excellency, हमारे गर्मजोशी भरे स्वागत के लिए मैं आपका हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। पिछले वर्ष कजान में हमारी बहुत ही सार्थक चर्चा हुई थी। हमारे संबंधों को एक सकारात्मक दिशा मिली है। हमारे सहयोग से दोनों देशों के 2.8 बिलियन लोगों के हित जुड़े हुए हैं। इससे पूरी मानवता के कल्याण का मार्ग भी प्रशस्त होगा। परस्पर विश्वास, सम्मान और संवेदनशीलता के आधार पर हम अपने संबंधों को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध हैं।
PM Modi's meeting with Putin drew particular attention at the summit just days after US tariffs on Indian goods were announced. The optics of warmth between Moscow and New Delhi stood out. Putin prioritizing talks with Modi even overshadowed the presence of Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. This comes as Washington sharpens its criticism. White House trade advisor Peter Navarro went on Fox News alleging that discounted Russian crude is refined in India and sold abroad, and that is indirectly supporting Moscow's war effort. India, however, has consistently defended its energy policy, stressing that purchases are based on national interest and energy security. New Delhi also points out that Europe until very recently was the largest buyer of Russian energy, yet it is India that faces disproportionate scrutiny. At the same time, India's refining capacity plays a stabilizing role in global markets, ensuring supply to regions that would otherwise face shortages. The attempt to single out India overlooks the wider reality. New Delhi is diversifying its energy sources while maintaining a careful balance with all major powers, including the United States. Yet against that backdrop of US pressure and tariffs, the sight of Modi, Xi and Putin together sends a strong message that India is not yielding to unilateral dictates. Instead, New Delhi is strengthening ties with major Asian powers, countering Washington's push for economic isolation. China is Iran's president on the same stage. The event highlights Beijing's role in the heart of the bloc, openly challenging Western power. Indonesia has been gripped by unrest after a week of nationwide protest turned violent, leaving at least 7 people dead and hundreds injured. It all began on August 25th when thousands gathered outside Parliament in Jakarta. Their anger was triggered by news that lawmakers would now receive housing allowances nearly 10 times the city's minimum wage, at a time when the government was enforcing strict austerity measures cutting education, health and public works. Demonstrators, including student groups, accused the government of favoring political elites, conglomerates and the military, echoing concerns about the growing influence of armed forces in civilian life under President Prabowo Subianto, a former general who has been in office for less than a year. The situation escalated sharply after the death of a 21-year-old delivery driver in Jakarta. He was run over by an armored vehicle belonging to a parliamentary police unit. His death became a rallying point for protesters, sparking wider clashes across the country. Government offices, police stations and public transport hubs have been set on fire. Protests have spread from Jakarta to major cities across Java, Sumatra, Sulawesi and Borneo. In some areas, mobs looted officials' homes, including the residence of Finance Minister Sri Mulyani Indrawati.
Kepada pihak kepolisian dan TNI, saya perintahkan untuk mengambil tindakan yang setegas-tegasnya terhadap segala macam bentuk pengerusakan fasilitas umum, penjarahan terhadap rumah individu ataupun.
The human toll has been severe. A student was killed in Yogyakarta during clashes, while in Solo, a 60-year-old pedicab driver died after exposure to tear gas. Authorities say over 12,000 people have been detained in Jakarta alone. President Prabowo has cancelled a trip to China and ordered security forces to take tough measures, warning of what he called treason and terrorism.
Karena dinamika di dalam negeri, Bapak Presiden ingin terus memantau secara langsung, beliau juga ingin terus memonitor secara langsung, kemudian juga beliau ingin memimpin secara langsung dan mencari penyelesaian-penyelesaian yang terbaik.
Para pimpinan DPR menyampaikan akan dilakukan pencabutan beberapa kebijakan DPR RI, termasuk besaran tunjangan anggota DPR dan juga moratorium kunjungan kerja ke luar negeri.
He has promised a transparent investigation into the delivery driver's death, with 7 police officers under scrutiny. At the same time, he moved to promote dozens of injured police officers, signaling his support for security forces. Internationally, the UN has called for an inquiry into the use of excessive force. Human Rights Watch has warned against treating civilian unrest as terrorism, citing Indonesia's history of heavy-handed policing. Several countries, including the US, Australia and France, have issued travel advisories. For President Prabowo, still in his first year in office, these protests mark the toughest test of his leadership so far.
Today, we hold 40% of Gaza City. The operation will continue to expand and intensify in the coming days.
Israel announced that it now controls 40% of Gaza City, one of the most densely populated areas in the Strip. Officials say operations will only intensify in the coming days, raising fears of even more destruction, displacement, and loss of life.
Today, we hold 40% of Gaza City. The operation will continue to expand and intensify in the coming days. Hamas will face the Israeli army forces in their full force in Gaza City. We will increase the pressure on Hamas until it is destroyed. We will continue to pursue them everywhere.
Israeli military officials announced the killing of Hadefa Kelot, better known as Abu Obeda, the longtime spokesman and chief of Hamas's military wing. Brigadier General Effie Defrin says Kellogg was among the last surviving members of Hamas's original leadership accused of helping orchestrate the October 7th attacks.
Last weekend, the IDF and Shin Bet, Secret Service, attacked and eliminated the spokesperson of the military wing and head of the propaganda apparatus of the Hamas terrorist organization, Hadifa Kalut, who called himself Abu Ubaidah. Kalut was a senior terrorist and symbol in the Hamas terrorist organization, one of the last remaining leaders from the original leadership that led the brutal massacre on October 7th.
The military also released what it claims is a photograph recovered in Gaza, said it shows senior Hamas figures together, including Abu Ubaidah alongside Mohammad Daif, Rafa Salama and Mohammad Oda. Officials stressed that Oda, the group's intelligence chief, remains alive but vowed that he would too be targeted.
The head of military wing of Hamas, Mohammed Deif, Abu Ubaidah, Hamas spokesman, the head of Khan Yunis brigades, Rafa Salama, and the head of intelligence of the military wing, Mohammed Uda. On the screen, we can see a picture that was found in the Gaza Strip, and it is revealed now. In the picture is Abu Ubaidah, next to the head of military wing of Hamas, Mohammed Deif, the head of Khan Yunis brigades, Rafa Salama, and the head of intelligence of the military wing, Mohammed Uda, the only one still alive, and we will reach him too.
Israel says its objectives remains unchanged, dismantling Hamas, freeing the remaining hostages and blocking the group from regaining access in Gaza. But as Israeli tanks move deeper into Gaza, the civilian death toll is also growing. Palestinian health authorities say 53 people were killed on Thursday alone, most of them in Gaza City. Entire neighborhoods like Tufa, Sabra and Shazaya have been bombarded from land and air. Local rescue teams say families are being crushed in collapsing buildings, while tents and encampments set up by displaced people have been set on fire by incoming shellings.
We woke up to a strike and screaming. I felt as if it was raining on our tent. I turned on a flashlight and couldn't see the tent. I checked on my son, and I found him lying on his back with blood running down from his nose and bleeding from the back of his head. I started screaming, and my brother came and took him from me. Then I went back to check on my second, my daughter Noor, and found that she was drenched in blood from her head to her feet. My third child was lying here. She was saved by God. My fourth daughter was taken for treatment because she had a shrapnel in her chest.
Tens and thousands of civilians remain in the city. Some say they would rather die in their homes than risk displacement. Humanitarian groups warn that this could become the most dangerous displacement of the war, particularly for children already weakened by starvation and lack of medicine. Israel's current push in Gaza City began in early August. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described it as a part of a broader plan to defeat Hamas in its last strongholds. The war itself began on October 7, 2023, when Hamas launched a surprise attack on southern Israel, killing around 1,200 people and taking more than 250 hostages. Since then, Israel's military response has left much of Gaza in ruins. Palestinian officials say more than 63,000 people have been killed, the majority of them civilians. While Israel pushes deeper into Gaza, a new diplomatic front is opening. Several US allies, including Britain, France, Canada, Australia, and Belgium, have announced the plans to formally recognize Palestinian state at the upcoming United Nations General Assembly sessions. Supporters say recognition is long overdue and necessary to pressure Israel in halting settlements expansion and military operations in Gaza, but Washington is not on board. Speaking from Ecuador, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio reiterated that America has urged its partners not to proceed with the recognition.
Look, we told all these countries, we told them all. We said, if you guys do this recognition stuff, it's all fake, it's not even real. If you do it, you're going to create big problems. There's going to be a response from Israel. You're going to make it harder to get a ceasefire. And it may even trigger these sorts of actions that you've seen, or at least these attempts at these actions.
Rubio also declined to comment on Israeli debate over annexing parts of the West Bank, but insisted the matter is not final. Palestinian officials say recognition by major Western countries could be a turning point in the war. Meanwhile, the humanitarian crisis continues to worsen. Health authorities in Gaza report 370 people, including 131 children, have died of malnutrition in recent weeks. Aid groups say starvation is now spreading faster than international relief can keep up. Inside Israel, senior military figures are cautioning that without a clear political day-after strategy, the country could face an extended and a costly presence in Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu has far resisted demands from far-right ministers to impose direct military rule and re-establish settlements. With much of Gaza City in ruins, tens of thousands of displaced, and the UN preparing for a diplomatic challenge, Israel's campaign now faces a choice between further escalation and intensifying international calls for restraint. For now, the military says the operations will continue. We will continue following how this unfolds in the UN General Assembly elections, and will the Western allies move ahead with the recognition of the Palestinian statehood? That's all for this edition of Global Wrap with me, Shivani Singh. Stay tuned for more updates on the stories that's shaping the world. Thanks for watching. See you in the next report.